Hey, welcome. I'm going to talk about my experiences and kind of my thoughts around DMT, which is just what most people consider DMT. It's kind of the standard DMT. And yeah, my thoughts and experiences and lessons with that. I'll talk about the different trips that I've had and what I've learned. So the first time I did DMT was probably about 6 months ago, and I had a vape pen. I was vaping it, which was very convenient towards the end of my use with it, but very difficult to learn how to use. So the DMT crystals would come in a little cartridge, and then I just put it on a little vape battery, and I could just push the button and smoke it. But it was pretty difficult to learn how to do it to the point where you're going to blast off. And what that means is there's varying degrees of where DMT can kind of take you, and different levels, and sort of the blast off level is where you hit a certain threshold and you're basically just blasted into a crazy other realm. And so it took me a while to have my first blast off experience with that. And in fact, the first night that I got it, I didn't really know what I was doing, and I was just holding the button down, and it was too hot, and I was just blowing or sucking in as much air as I could, and I completely burned the back of my throat. And luckily it was an issue with the battery, well, partly, but luckily I didn't actually inhale very much smoke. There was not a lot coming out, so I didn't actually get sent into a trip, because I think that would have been really horrible, because I burnt my throat really bad, and I actually had to wait 3 days for it to recover before I could even try smoking it again or vaping it again. So I was much more careful the next time, and I was able to get really amazing visuals and body highs for a while. And then I started to be able to get really good blast off experiences. And so I think the first one that I had was just crazy amounts of color with kind of just these different shapes that were very playful. It was extremely playful in the beginning. DMT was just so blissful and playful and the greatest thing ever. And I would go into the trips and come back down oh my god, I could just stay in there forever. And not really forever, but it's it felt so nourishing and just so playful and beautiful, and there was just this energy that was just showing me things and kind of taking care of me, and I could just be a little child looking up and looking at the lights and playing with whatever's going on, and just kind of be taken on a little show and a little ride. And I listened to some music pretty much on most of my trips, and the music was just amazing. Listening to my favorite artists, mostly Cave Town. I love Cave Town, and I was really listening to a lot of Cave Town. And it would just be I would feel so connected to the music. It was insanely beautiful. So yeah, I'd see just colorful shapes that are kind of, they're folding in and out of each other, and just in different dimensions and ways that I can't really comprehend very well without the DMT induced experience. But the thing that happens with DMT is, at least for me, and I think for most people, is basically all your senses start to sort of twist and melt together. So you're really you'll hear noise and it will affect your body, and it's kind of hard to tell the difference between your senses. And things being able to taste color and things like that are very heightened in a DMT trip. And so for me, the higher I get, and as I take more hits, they say take 3 hits to blast off, and sometimes I wouldn't even need that with the vape pen, and sometimes I would need more than that. But yeah, as you like take the first hit, it's kind of just like this body high, at least for me, and like I just start to see like light pixelated colors, and like I can tell something's happening. I feel really light, and then I take the second hit, and then everything's starting to sort of like melt and twist, and I start like basically becoming like a DNA strand that is just like twisting and expanding, and all of my senses are melting together into it, and more imagery of just like stuff, random things. DMT is so random, and it's just like the infinite world of things, and all these different things will just come up. But like Terrence McKenna talks about a lot, the sort of archetype of DMT is the circus, and it feels extremely true for me. There's so many like circus themed things happening for me, and there's a specific like noise, there's like this music that will start to play as you go higher, and I'm saying it, I'm assuming that this is how it is for pretty much everyone or most people, but it sounds like for me it's like a wind-up Jack in the Box or something, and it's a very strange noise. And yeah, for me there's just like a lot of visuals and feelings of spiraling in different colors, and it feels so familiar to me. Like it happens pretty much every time I take the second hit, and I'm just like back in this familiar like circus feeling, spiraling, colorful thing. And that's when I tend to like sometimes lose track of like, oh yeah, I need to take a third hit if I want to blast off. And sometimes I'm at that point and I'm, you know, usually your instinct is to be like, oh no, I am not going higher than this. This is insane enough. And so I did that many times as well. The vape pen is actually really cool because I probably got like 100 hits out of it. Most of them were not good hits, and I really only blasted off maybe 5 or 6 times total with all those hits. Maybe more than that. And so in the beginning for me, I was just so gung-ho about it, and I was like so wanting to blast off and experience that. I felt pretty like fearless about it, and so yeah, I would just blast off, and it would be really amazing. Such amazing experiences for the first few times that I blasted off, the first like 4 or 5 trips that I had at least, were just all amazing and like wonderful and crazy, and I just kept wanting to go back. It just felt so good. And sometimes I would blast off 2 or 3 times in one sitting, and maybe not necessarily blast off, but like definitely a couple times blast off, and then maybe just like kind of get into a lighter state without fully like you know, sending myself off. And so probably at least 2 or 3 trips were just kind of these like playful little energies, which it's hard to like, I have to imagine that it's all me, because if I believe that basically everything that exists is part of like a unified psyche. DMT is really the only psychedelic that I've ever done where it feels like there's a clear line between me and like the energy that is kind of there with me, where all other psychedelics I've done, it's very easy for me to like identify the thing that's like my mind and whatever's talking to me, even if it doesn't seem like it's me. It's like this obvious, okay, this is me, this is a part of my psyche, this is like what's going on in my head, I'm creating this. Like there's a very strong sense that I'm creating this experience that I'm having, and that anything that's happening, any thing that's talking to me from the psychedelic, like that's me creating that thing talking to me. But with DMT, it feels different. It feels like I'm just being shot into a universe with other things that have nothing to do with my own psyche, and they're kind of just like interacting with me. It's really trippy. I really like questioned a lot of things about psychedelics doing DMT, because it really feels like there are entities that are there to just play with you or like torment you. And it doesn't feel like it has anything to do with like your life or your psyche. It's just like these things that are there, and you've just like intruded upon their space and their reality, and they're like, what the hell? And some of them are like, oh yes, it's good to see you, come and join us. And then some of them are like, what are you doing here? Get out of here now. But yeah, I'll get more into that. But yeah, DMT just seems like too cosmic. I feel like although it's one of the most powerful psychedelics, it's also like for me, one of the least useful psychedelics as far as like giving me practical information to use within my own life. It's like these trips seemingly have nothing to do with me and my life and like what's going on. Like it doesn't seem like it's coming from some thing within my psyche that is giving me clarity on anything. It's just showing me like crazy ass universes that don't make any sense. And you're just like, well, it didn't seem to really teach me anything, but that was freaking cool, and it like opened me up to more possibility, and like the infiniteness of life, but really didn't really come back with a whole lot more than a really cool trip. And in one of my trips, I discovered like slowly moving my body while I was like blasted off, which is pretty difficult. You can do a lot of things on DMT, but you really have to be like conscious and intentional, and you have to remember that you have a body that you can move. And I think the more you do it, the more you can, it's like sometimes you have to set the intention of what you're gonna do before you go into it. Just like taking the third hit is something you really gotta like be intentional about and remember and keep reminding yourself, or else you'll just like fall back and not do it. But if you can remember, then you can work up, no matter pretty much how high you are, you can work up the effort to get it to your mouth. Well, it was a lot easier with the vape pen. It's probably not so easy when you've got like a butane torch and a big pipe or something like that. So the vape was convenient for taking more hits, and you didn't have to worry about like setting the house on fire or something like that. But yeah, so in this other trip, I started playing around with like just moving my body a little bit, and there was a point where I had my eyes closed, because it's just really hard for me to open my eyes on DMT or any strong psychedelic. But I like rolled my face, and as I did that, it was like I was creating universes with every movement. It was like every micro movement that I make, no matter how small, is like creating universes. So I kind of like just rotated my head. I was laying in my hammock. I pretty much laid in my hammock for all my trips out in nature while I was living in Austin. And at one point, I just opened up my mouth as I rolled my head, and I was like, ah. And I was, it really reminded me of like, I think, one of the Hindu stories of, I don't really know that much about like all the gods of India or like a lot of the stories. But I remember one story of like one of them opens their mouth and like the entire universe was in their mouth, and that was basically the experience that I had. Was like I just opened my mouth and all of reality was inside of my mouth, and and then I was like watching it just like spiral by in my mouth, and then I asked the question, I was like, where's like humanity in all this? Where are we? And then just like this little tiny pocket opened up and expanded, and it was like DNA flowing, and then a little pocket opened up in the DNA. It was like, oh, there's human reality, and then it just like closed and kept going and kind of just drifted on by. It was like, oh, okay, there's our tiny little spot in infinity. And as I blasted off more and more, the trips became more crazy and intense. And so one of the trips that I had, I just put on, like, I had headphones in and I had Spotify, and I just searched like a random DMT playlist or something on Spotify, and I just played it and then smoked the DMT. And I remember at one point the Spangle song DMT, like the DMT Spangle song came on, and I had never heard it before, but that was like the craziest ride ever. It was just the sounds from that while being blasted off on DMT were crazy. I was like, these sounds cannot be possible. There's no way. Like, that song definitely felt like it was absolutely made for DMT when I was on the trip. And it was just like all this stuff happening in my brain, and just like lights popping off, and the sensations were crazy. And I remember at that point, in that trip, like, I started moving my hands to the music, and then I like felt one of my hands, and it was very strange, because it felt like alien hands. It felt like long, slim, just like alien hands that were like octopuses or something, just like grabbing. It feels really crazy, because it was like, it's my hand, but it felt like it was like 3 times longer than my hand when I felt it, and like I was just being touched by crazy alien tentacle fingers or something. But it didn't really creep me out too much. I was like, oh wow, that's very interesting and kind of cool, huh? Like, I feel like a total alien right now. And so then my next trip was the last time that I ever fully blasted off. And it was the first time that I have experienced like what you call a bad trip on any psychedelic. It was just very scary and very intense, and it was like, and I had just smoked it like 2 times before this trip. I think actually I had the trip with the Spangle song is the one, as like the trip that I had right before I just smoked this one again, because I was like, okay, I'm just gonna do one more before I go to bed. And I played Cave Town, one of my favorite songs back then from Cave Town. And all my journeys with DMT had been so pleasant. I was like, what? There can't be like such a thing as a bad trip. Like, or maybe I was like, nah, I guess my mind is just like too peaceful and at ease to have bad trips or something like that. But yeah, then I experienced it, and so like I blasted off, and yeah, I just remember at a point being conscious of like the music, and then just like this creeping feeling of fear. I was like, and I just didn't know what was happening. And then at some point my mind said, oh, this is a bad trip. And right when I said that, it just like got immensely worse. And then I went into a realm, because there are like legit different realms that are very common for people to go into. This is another trippy thing with DMT, that like makes it feel like this doesn't seem like it's just my psyche. Because there are so many common DMT realms and common DMT archetypes that people get sent to, It's like, it's not like you're just dealing with your personal stuff. You can literally get blasted off into very common realms with very common characters that a lot of people experience, and they seem to have a certain energy to them. And it's not, maybe it's some like collective thing for humans that we're going to, but yeah, it definitely feels very like foreign and very alien, very different from it being your own like psychological stuff. And so I was blasted off into basically the circus realm with jesters, and the thing that's basically always reported with these Joker characters is like this room, usually with pillars that are spinning, and there are checkerboard patterns in the room with no walls, and then there's just like one or multiple Joker figures. And sometimes it can be a pleasant trip for people, but for me, they were like taunting me and just being very mean and very unwelcoming, and I was pretty scared of them. And they didn't look terrifying. They were like little puppets. They're like little pink, playful, like cartoon-like Joker puppets. And they were like on these pillars, and they were just like spinning around with their tongues sticking out at me. And the energy that I basically felt from them was like, you're not welcome here, don't ever come back here, like why are you here? And yeah, I definitely felt a very strong energy of being unwelcome there, and like they were trying to scare me basically. So that's the first time that I felt like the terrifying power of psychedelics, and especially DMT, and like how bad it could be. I remember like coming down. Oh, and also in this trip there was like physical sensation. It was like I've heard that this is kind of maybe not common, but it's not necessarily uncommon. Like multiple people report this, of like this feeling of being like electrically sort of shocked or prodded or something. It just felt like I was being like lightly, like touching an electric fence or something, and it just like zapped up my arm and through my body, and it just kept pulsing like this really uncomfortable zap. And later on I sort of was guessing that maybe that was like a helpful thing, like maybe I was working through fears, and the right side of my body and my right arm and shoulder have always been pretty messed up. And so I just like theorized that maybe it was actually like helping me in some way to like kind of shock and reboot my nervous system or something like that, and it was a little uncomfortable. But I don't actually know if that's true. And so I came down from that trip basically like in the fetal position, and I started crying, and just kind of like letting out like this fear, like I had just been violated, because it really felt like, it's crazy, because when you're on substances, especially DMT, your psyche is so open. You're basically in different dimensions. Like say if we're normally here in the human physical dimension, we're maybe on like the third or fourth density or dimension. And then when your brain is opened up by DMT, you're on some higher, some higher plane, and basically you're susceptible to emotions and feelings that are like equivalent to the level of the plane that you're experiencing. So if you've only ever experienced third or fourth dimensional fear, then it's pretty freaking terrifying to go on psychedelic trips and experience like 8th dimensional fear or something like that. And you're like, oh my God, I've never felt fear like this. I didn't know it was possible to experience fear the way that I'm feeling it now. It's like every cell in my body is being raped, and like you're dealing with fear, plus you're dealing with like yourself melting into different dimensions and realities, and everything's just kind of like folding in on itself and you don't know what's going on. Plus you're just like, your mind and body are so open to feeling things in more intense ways. It's pretty amazing the level of fear that you can experience when your mind is opened up by substances like that. And so after that trip, I got pretty scared of DMT and thought, like, I don't really want to do this anymore. Like, I might not ever do DMT again because that was pretty scary and I don't want that. Which was, yeah, it feels like some sort of shame or something, because there was such an innocence to DMT for me, and then it was kind of like, now we're gonna wake you up to the real world. This is reality. There is fear and there's suffering, and there's like real terror here in the universe. And so it was kind of like being a little kid that just had all of their innocence ripped out of them by like reality or society or something like that. And just like, oh, I guess this is how it is. I guess this is how reality is, and I just like have to be on my guard because it can be terrifying out here. So then the next day I tried to smoke one more time because I was like, okay, maybe that was just kind of a fluke. People just have bad trips and maybe I'll just have a good one. But I didn't blast off because basically I took one hit and I was feeling like okay. I was like a little nervous, and then I took the second hit and I just like got this really strong psychic energy telling me like, do not take another hit. This is as far as you go. You are not going any higher than this. And it was just like, I had no choice but to comply basically, but it was so strong and it was still scary. It was still kind of like I'm being dominated. And I also had like some of that shocking going through my arm again. And you know, it wasn't creepy because there weren't like visuals. I didn't blast off into some like crazy other reality where there's other creatures, but just a strong energy that's like, you're not allowed. It's basically telling me like you're in timeout and you're not allowed to blast off anymore. At least for right then. At least for a while. And so that was the last time that well, no, that wasn't the last time, because I was still using it to just like take small hits, which was really comforting, and I actually really enjoy that, and I think that's probably what I would use DMT for a lot if I had it again, is to just like not blast off so much and to just like take one hit or so and just let my body relax, because your body relaxes so much and your nervous system just relaxes so much on DMT. It's really amazing. And it's so comforting, and on just like low doses of DMT, you can just feel very held and taken care of, and you can still feel like a really good energy. It feels more like it's kind of your own psyche taking care of you. There's not, you're not blasting off into hyperspace with other beings, and it's more controllable, and can feel really good to just not smoke so much of it. And so the one thing that I felt like I took away from it after I had that sort of scary trip with the clowns was like, you don't need psychedelics. Like literally life is the craziest freaking psychedelic trip ever. It was just kind of like, look around. Like I was walking through like some parks and it was just like, look around, this is crazy, look at this trip. This is insane. Like if you had never experienced life before, and you just like, if you were some DMT entity and you smoked something and all of a sudden you're here on Earth, you'd be like, this is insane. What is happening here? And like all the colors that we take for granted because we're just so used to it. It was just kind of like, you really don't need psychedelics. This is the most powerful. Life being alive is the most powerful psychedelic trip you could ever imagine. But of course it's hard to keep that understanding and that idea and really like feel it all the time, because it becomes boring and mundane, and you feel pressure and responsibility, and like you have to have some purpose or something. And so that sort of wonderment and fairy tale like quality of life kind of dissipates pretty quickly. And then you have to do things like vipassana or psychedelics or breath work, something like almost intense, just to remind you that life is insanely beautiful and insanely trippy. So that's my DMT stories. I honestly don't feel like I learned that much from DMT, but I would definitely do it again. I think mostly this time as a tool to face my fears around DMT. And also I just like have a lot of curiosity about the different DMT realms and all the places you can go with it that are like archetypical and like common places, and just experience what those places are like, and to just kind of continue exploring my psyche. That seems to be what I enjoy so much in life, is just different ways of exploring my own mind, because I believe that my psyche basically is everything, and exploring it is like not the only thing, but just one of the things that I feel strongly called to do. I feel less attracted to creating things necessarily in the physical world, but just exploring the psychological world of my mind more. And sometimes that means going a little bit insane, but I'm going to talk about that more in some of my next videos. So thanks for watching. See ya.